Happy holidays to all of you once again, and thank you for taking some of your holiday time and spending it with me here at Brother Counsel Studios, where we don't take breaks. We continue to bring you the content that you have come to expect and enjoy. So today we're going to be continuing to talk about the Prosecutors podcast as it relates to their take on the Karen Reed case. As you know, I've been offering other attorneys who have been following this case, who have watched the case, and who feel that she should have been found guilty to have a discussion with me, have a respectful, open dialogue with another attorney, lawyer to lawyer. I think people would be interested in seeing that. And as of yet, I have not gotten anybody to take me up on the offer. So I do have a wonderful community here, and they have been sending me different podcasts or channels or ideas of people or lawyers who actually feel that Karen Reed should have been found guilty. So I got sent the Prosecutors podcast, and these are two lawyers. One of them is a Harvard grad, one of them is a Yale grad, and these are lawyers who watch the trial, analyze the trial, and believe that Karen Reed should have been found guilty. So they go through each of the defense's witnesses. Last video, we discussed the first defense witness, which was Lucky Loughran, and I gave you some of my opinions about some of their analysis on that, and you can go back and watch that and see which ones you agree with more. So today, we're going to be talking about the next witness, which they discuss on their podcast, the Prosecutors podcast. And this is the next witness, Dr. Marie Russell. Now, you know, if you were following this case, that Dr. Marie Russell had another Daubert hearing where it seems the judge wants to hear whether she's actually qualified to serve as an expert witness and in what capacity. Last trial, she was actually only allowed to talk about that these injuries and wounds and abrasions on John O'Keefe's arms are consistent with a dog attack, but she was not allowed to testify that they are inconsistent with a car versus pedestrian strike. So that was one way that she limited her testimony. So we'll see. Maybe this time in the second trial, she'll be allowed, now that there's a whole long Daubert hearing, and it's going to be continued, by the way. So maybe at the end of the conclusion of this, she will allow Dr. Russell to also talk about that these wounds are not consistent with a strike from a Lexus going backwards at 24 miles per hour. So that has yet to be seen. But this is the witness that they're going to be talking about today in their podcast that we're going to be talking about today. Not that they talked about today. They recorded this already a little while ago. And we're going to be pulling it up and playing it. But before we do, please, if you all are still in the holiday spirit, I am playing a hockey tournament to benefit a charity, a very special charity and organization called RCCS, which helps families that have been stricken with cancer. So the link is in the description. Any sort of amount is appreciated if you can donate to a wonderful, very special cause. And it'll help me get on my skates to play hockey in this tournament. So without any further ado, let's pull up the podcast, and we're going to hear what they have to say about Dr. Marie Russell.
Dr. Marie Russell. That was a really interesting person for a lot of different reasons. So she was a retired emergency room physician, and she had previously worked for the California State Prison and as a Malden police officer in the early 80s. One thing, you're going to see a bunch of people from California, the defense called. I assume that's because Alan Jackson knows them from prior cases, because he's calling a bunch of California people.
Now, that is a pretty interesting assumption, and it's definitely an interesting assumption if you actually watch the trial, because if you watch this trial, there was a Daubert hearing, right? There was a Daubert hearing in the middle of the trial because Dr. Marie Russell came up in the middle of trial, and that's when she contacted the defense. Now, right after that Daubert hearing, if you were watching, there was oral argument about whether Judge Cannoni is going to allow Dr. Marie Russell to testify. During that oral argument, Alan Jackson said to the judge that he has never had any sort of interaction with Dr. Marie Russell. So this is not someone that Alan Jackson knows. This is not someone that he's worked with in other cases. He's represented to the court, in open court, which is on the record, that he doesn't know this person. Now, if you're going to say that Alan Jackson was lying straight through his teeth to the judge, that can have some pretty serious ramifications as it relates to his bar license. So I don't think he would do that. So here, for you to say that you're assuming that Alan Jackson just knows these California people, it's just contrary to what he actually said in trial. So you're basically, if you're going to make that assumption, you're basically calling him a liar, that he would lie in open court and say that he doesn't know Dr. Marie Russell. So maybe he just forgot about that interaction and just wasn't so careful about this assumption that he's making. So to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, you're going to have to assume that either he didn't watch that part or he just forgot about it, and that's why he made this assumption.
So in the 90s, she served in the LA coroner's office, and she published an article on animal bites and scratches. So you would think this is going to be a really good person for the whole dog thing, though her publications are going to come back to haunt her a little bit. She's very interested in dog bites. She said the injuries on John's arm, that right arm, were consistent with an animal, possibly a large dog bite or claw marks. She reviewed photographs. She did not have access to John's body. She agreed that whatever it was not a solid contact from the dog, which, by the way, is obvious because, I'm sorry, the marks don't actually look dog bites, and we're going to talk about that in a second. So she said, other than pointing to the parallel lines in what she describes as tiny puncture holes caused by a dog, she never really describes why she thinks this is a dog bite as opposed to any of the other various ways you could have this injury. And she
Okay, so let's just pause that for a second. Other than showing us with a picture why the patterns of these abrasions and wounds and puncture holes are consistent with the dog bite, she hasn't really showed us how these wounds are more consistent with the dog bite as opposed to any other sort of way that he could have gotten this injury. Now, I don't know what else you do need to show. This is an ER physician who has seen thousands of cases like this, or thousands of cases of wounds and abrasions, and she is showing you specifically with the picture, with the lasers, and showing you how these patterns equal a dog bite. They're consistent with a dog bite. And she said, also part of her testimony, that she's reviewed everything. First of all, she's reviewed a lot of medical records, all the autopsy records. She reviewed the neuropathology records. She reviewed the other medical records. She reviewed quite a few records as well. And she saw the photographs. And there she is showing you that the patterns of this wound are consistent with a dog bite. So I don't know what else you want. Like, what else? He's saying, well, other than just showing us that the pattern of these wounds are consistent with a dog bite, I don't know what else she's done to convince us that these are not dog bite wounds. Well, I think that's pretty significant. I think that's pretty good. To actually show us specifically how all these patterns are actually consistent with the dog bite. That's pretty persuasive to me, as well as being as well as reviewing over all the records that she reviewed in order to come to that conclusion, as well as her experience, which she said that over the thousands and thousands of cases that she's reviewed as an ER physician, that she's treated as an ER physician, she can tell you that this is a dog attack. That's pretty persuasive. I don't know what else you want. So as much as he's trying to play this down, I don't know how he's effectively doing that, because it's very, very convincing what she's saying. I mean, if you don't want to believe her testimony, you can say, well, I just don't think that she's an expert. Seeing thousands of cases in LA maybe doesn't make you an expert, and I choose to believe a different expert. Okay, that's a little bit of a different argument. If you got Dr. Marie Russell and then the Commonwealth has their expert who's also seen thousands of patients and who can positively tell you that it's inconsistent with the dog attack, then great. You can say, yeah, I believe the Commonwealth's expert over Dr. Marie Russell. But to say that Dr. Marie Russell herself did not give us enough of a reason, or enough of a convincing reason, that these are dog bites, I think it's just not really so 100% honest if you were actually watching what her testimony was.
She sort of describes it as this almost like a hesitant strike or something. Like the dog is biting, but not hard enough that you're going to see a lot of the things you would expect, which she has to say, because that's the best you can get out of these wounds. Now, on cross-examination, Lally, he notes that she had not worked in forensics since the 90s. She became involved in the case after reading an article in the Boston Globe, and she reached out to the defense through a prosecutor friend in May of 2024 after the trial had started, which just blows my mind. An expert involving themselves in a case. Like, I can go ahead and tell you, when she called the defense, you knew what she was going to say. So
let's just stop for a second. So the way that she got involved with the case is he actually, that's true. She read this Boston Globe article. And if you watched her testimony, watch what she said during the Daubert hearing, what happened was she read this article that talked about the Karen Reed case, as you would imagine it would, and it said that one of the points of controversy was whether these wounds on John O'Keefe's arms are the result of a dog attack or being hit by a car. So that's what she read. Now, I don't know if there's pictures in there or not, but that probably not. I don't know if you're allowed to put those pictures in that magazines, but there was, whatever. Maybe there was, maybe there wasn't. But the point is that she reads this article and there is some sort of question in this case about whether this is a dog attack. Now, she's an expert. She knows that it's a very specialized field. Not a lot of doctors are interested or looking into becoming an expert in dog bites. There's a lot of other areas of medicine you can become an expert in. Even as an ER physician, maybe you want to look more into strokes or heart attacks or gunshot wounds or knife stabbings. And there's a lot of other things. She happens to be interested in dog attacks, and she wrote some articles. So she says, hey, look, I'm an expert in this field. I can possibly help with giving an opinion here. Now, if you follow the evidence, you follow what she said, she didn't come to her conclusion at that point. All she saw, again, if you just base it on her testimony without making any other assumptions or conclusions, is that she read the article. She said, hey, this is something that's right up my alley. Send me the materials and I'll give you my opinion. And that's what happened. Alan Jack, she didn't make up her opinion before. She didn't say, at least it definitely did not come out during her testimony, that she already made up her opinion by looking at that article or maybe seeing a picture. She said, send me all the materials as much as you can send me. I'll review the medical records. I'll review the reports. I'll review the autopsy reports. I'll look at the pictures. I'll look at everything that you want me to. And then I'll tell you what my expert opinion is, because I am a pretty good expert on dog bites. That's what happened. And then after Alan Jackson sent her the materials, the next day after reviewing it, she called them back and said, hey, or emailed them back and said, this is my opinion about this. So that was what happened here. This wasn't a case where she read the Boston Globe and said, hey, that's a dog attack. Hey, let me call Alan Jackson and say, this is a dog attack. I know that, without reviewing anything other than that article. That's not what happened here. So for him to represent that is what happened here, it's just not, again, it's not exactly what came out during trial. That's not, you know me, I like to base my opinions on what's coming out as evidence during trial, as what is testified to during direct examination or cross-examination. So that's in terms of that. Now, the other part that he has a real problem with is the fact that the expert reached out to Alan Jackson as opposed to the other way around. So I want to let him perhaps finish his thought about this, and then I'm going to give you what my opinion is.
She read an article about this. She didn't have access to any of the documents or the good photographs or any of the stuff you'd want an expert to consider before making an expert opinion. And she'd already decided what this was going to be.
Right. So that's just simply not true. I mean, that's not what she testified to. I mean, maybe this is deep down what she thought and never said and never came out. And somehow he is able to go into her mind and know that. But that's just not what the evidence bared out. That's just not what she said.
When she called the defense attorney. I was stunned by this, and Lally brought it out a little bit. I thought he spent too much time focusing on when she got her Boston Globe membership and not enough time focusing on how strange it was that she is the one making overtures to the defense and not the other way around. Now,
let me just talk about this okay? What's the relationship between experts and attorneys? I think people want to know this, okay? So I'm going to tell you. The relationship is the following. If you have a case that you're working on and you need an expert, so sometimes you have to go and reach out and find an expert. You need a specialized expert in some specific area that has to do with your case. Then you've got to put out some feelers or figure out who's going to be a good expert to testify about this specific question that you have in your case. So yeah, a lot of times, very often, you'll reach out to the expert yourself. Now, there are plenty of times where I have had experts, I still routinely have experts reaching out to me, whether it's on LinkedIn or just an email saying, hey, just letting you know, I'm an ER physician. This is my resume. This is my curriculum vitae. I'm happy to help you review cases if you'd like. You get this all the time. You go to some other lawyering events, you go to some seminars, you'll have some people offering their services, their expertise to review certain things, whether they're biomechanical engineers, accident reconstructionists. You'll always have that. And then you may have already, some of the big firms already for sure have this. They already have a Rolodex. They already have these experts who have contacted them already and said, look, this is what we do. If you ever need us to review anything, we're happy to help. So there's plenty of times where experts do reach out to the attorneys themselves. Okay. Now, also, let's just take it the next step. The next step is you've got a case like this, which is high profile. So, right, most of our cases are not high profile. Nobody knows about them. So if there's some sort of expert in the middle of North Carolina that I don't know about, there's no way that expert's ever going to find out about this case that I'm dealing with now, because how should he? It's not on the news. Apparently, brother counsel's cases are not newsworthy. So how is he going to find out about it? So then there's no way for us to connect. But when you have a high-profile case like this, and you have someone who is actually a specialized expert in one of the very important areas of the case, I don't think it's so strange for the expert to reach out to the attorneys and saying, hey, look, this is exactly my field. I'm happy to help out. Send me the materials and let me, this is all about trying to find the truth, right? This is about truth and justice. So if you want to actually give the jury the truth, why not? Why not reach out to the defense attorney or the prosecutor and say, hey, this is my field. Let me help you out. Let me give you my opinion. Let me review everything and help the jury out. So as crazy as he thinks it is, I just don't think it's that crazy.
Oh, some other things he pointed out that kind of blew my mind. She'd only reviewed some of the files 2 days before her testimony, and she didn't create a written report, which, I mean, without a written report, I'm not even sure you could get that in our jurisdiction. Because one of the things you have to do is produce a report to the other side so that the other side can consider getting a new expert, be on notice of what you're going to say, be able to challenge your reasoning. So clearly in Massachusetts, that's not the case, but that's just typically you would have a report.
Of any expert.
I know.
It's literally the baseline of any expert, so much so that often you have a report. You always have a report. You don't always testify. That's why when you retain an expert, there's usually 2 fees, one for preparing the report and a higher fee for testifying, because you don't all testify as experts.
Okay, so some of the things that they're saying is true. Okay, so for example, you do sometimes hire an expert to prepare a report, and this is usually done during the normal course of discovery. You have a specific issue you want to talk about, you want a specific expertise about something, you may reach out to a few different experts, pay them all and say, hey, author a report, let me see your reports, and then you decide as the lawyer which expert is going to help your case better. And then you go to that expert and say, okay, I'm going to use you. I liked your report. And then, of course, you have to turn over the reports to the other side, and they get to see, all this good stuff also. But yes, and that's true that not all experts that are retained to write a report are actually eventually used for expert testimony during trial. Now, what happened in this case, again, is that Dr. Marie Russell reached out in the middle of trial. Okay, so this is not the normal course. They're talking about the normal course of business. Yes, in the normal course of discovery, then this is what happens. You get your experts, they write a report, you turn the report over to the other side gives you their expert reports, and you take their depositions, you decide who's going to testify, maybe you pay them a testifying fee. Yeah, this is all when you're dealing with a normal situation. But what do you do when you have an expert that reaches out to you in the middle of trial? So if you were following the case, you saw exactly what Judge Cannoni did about this. So one of the basic arguments that any trial lawyer is familiar with is trial by surprise. You always argue that if something was never turned over during discovery, this is trial by surprise, trial by ambush, and therefore that piece of evidence should never be allowed in. Okay, that's a fair argument that is made all the time, almost all the time. Almost every trial, you're going to hear some sort of argument that this is trial by surprise because you didn't have any notice of this expert or this witness or whatever it is. So that's still true. But when you have this case, so then that definitely is an argument to be made that Dr. Marie Russell should not be allowed to testify. She should be excluded to testify completely. And that's the argument that Lally made. So if you were following this, yeah, that's exactly the point. Because there's no report, because we didn't know about Dr. Marie Russell during discovery, because we didn't have an opportunity to take her deposition. So this is all trial by ambush. And that's why Lally moved. After the Daubert hearing, if you remember, and beyond that, like kind of her mini deposition in court, they had oral argument in front of the judge, Judge Cannoni. And that's what Lally said. She should be completely excluded, which would have been an okay remedy for Judge Cannoni to impose. She could have said, all right, that's the remedy I find. This is just too late. It's trial by ambush, trial by surprise, and we're not going to allow this in. Now, she could have done that. But she did say that this was a Rule 14 violation, which means that this is a discovery violation. This is a new expert you want to call during trial, and there was no notice of this given to the Commonwealth. So you're right. This is a Rule 14 violation. This is a discovery violation, and there's different remedies for discovery violations. So not preparing a report, not turning over a report, there could be certain remedies that are available. Now, the judge doesn't always have to say, we are going to exclude this witness from testifying. That's a very drastic, that is the most severe remedy to be imposed, that we're not going to allow this witness to testify, which has happened in plenty of cases. In this case, Judge Cannoni thought about it, and she said, look, what we're going to do is we're going to have, number one, a Daubert hearing. Number two, because the defense did not actually reach out to this witness. This wasn't Alan Jackson reaching out to Marie Russell and saying, hey, I can't believe I forgot about you this whole time. Let's add you to the witness list in the middle of a trial and call you as a witness. That's not what happened here. And that also came out during this oral argument that after the Daubert hearing, was that this was not the defense reaching out. And therefore, Alan Jackson was arguing that that's why you should not exclude this witness. We didn't do anything wrong. And therefore, you shouldn't use the most drastic remedy. Here you have somebody who is a specialized expert, exactly what this trial needs, and no one else is going to testify about it. It would very, very much help the jury to hear this expert opinion, and it would help them to determine the facts in this case. So what Judge Cannoni did do is she said, yes, I'm finding that this is a Rule 14 violation, but I'm not going to go to the most severe remedy, which is excluding this doctor from testifying. And instead, what I'm going to do is allow this mini deposition to happen. I'm going to allow for this Daubert hearing. I'm going to allow Lally to prepare for cross-examination. We can hold off calling Dr. Marie Russell so that he can adequately prepare for it. And as well, he's going to be given the opportunity and time to hire his own expert to rebut Dr. Marie Russell. So he was given all of these other opportunities, which Judge Cannoni said, we are going to allow you to do. So it doesn't automatically mean exclusion. And that's what Judge Cannoni eventually ruled. And she also extremely limited what Dr. Marie Russell was allowed to say, which was that only that these wounds and abrasions are consistent with a dog bite, as opposed to that she's not allowed to say that they are inconsistent with a pedestrian strike. So she definitely, I think, made a discretionary call here. She could have excluded her, but she didn't. And there's nothing that she did which was wrong. Now, it is a little bit weird, and it doesn't happen in every case, which is what they're talking about, but it doesn't mean automatically that you're going to exclude the witness. What Judge Cannoni did was exactly proper, and she let oral argument, and then she allowed all of this leeway for Lally, and she limited the testimony. So I think it was fine, and just so you can all understand that.
And what you usually get hired for is to produce a report. That's how kind of out of the ordinary this is.
And the other thing that's out of the ordinary, I mean, not out in the ordinary, but kind of questionable in this day and age, is you got somebody looking at photographs and saying, those are definitely teeth. No doubt about it. In fact, it's dog teeth. And if I had to say, it's a large dog. I'm not going to say it's a German Shepherd, but I probably would if you asked me, right? Well, Lally, he points out that forensic odontology has been on the outs as a forensic science for a very long time. Now, Russell would argue that was really about matching a bite to a specific person. Okay, that's true, but the same criticism would apply to matching a bite to a particular type of dog or a particular animal.
Now, let's just stop for a second and try to understand that argument. He's saying, well, forensic odontology is not a reliable science to what? It's not a reliable science to match up a specific dog, meaning your dog, not just a breed of dog, but your specific dog to this specific bite, right? So that's what the idea of odontology was. You know, you can take a bite and match it to a specific individual dog. So forensic odontology, that idea, that's not reliable. It's not reliable to say that this dog specifically was the culprit here. So now he says, well, the same criticism should apply to match any sort of wound to any sort of dog. I don't know how you make that jump. And I don't know if you've read that study, because usually studies are very specific to a specific outcome, what they're trying to find. Can we match a specific dog to a specific wound? But then to say, well, we can't, and therefore any wound in the world, we can't say with any sort of confidence that it's from any breed of dog or even a specific breed of dog. That's not what the study was devoted to. So I don't agree that you can just say, yeah, well, we should apply the same criticism across the board, and then just throw out the whole idea that anyone can ever tell you that any specific wound is related in any way to any sort of dog. I think that's way too broad to taking this specific study about a specific question and then just applying it across the board. But that seems to be what he's doing here.
And, you think about, I'm always drawn back to West Memphis 3. In the West Memphis 3 case, you have exactly the same thing. You have all these experts who are looking at marks. Some of them say it's a knife. Some of them say it's a person. Some of them say it's turtles. Some of them say it's dogs. And it's like, what do you actually know, right? about this? You're just sort of throwing it out there. Then Lally does the
the difference is that Dr. Marie Russell does know. That's the difference. She is an expert. She's seen thousands of cases of wounds for decades in an ER, and she can positively tell us that these are from a dog. So that's the difference. Yeah, she can tell you that this is not a turtle bite. She can tell you that this is not a stab wound. The patterns just don't add up. So yeah, she does know, and that's what her testimony was.
Typical thing you do when you're attacking an expert. He reviews the article that Russell wrote in the 90s, which reviewed 700 cases of dog bites. The spectrum of injuries you'd expect to see are deep puncture wounds, crushing wounds, wounds requiring debridement, deep bruising, and broken bones. Now, Russell said those would be dog bite wounds that required medical treatment, sort of a serious strike. Now, I just want to back up here. What are we talking about? Are we talking about a theory that this German Shepherd attacked this man in such a vicious way that it required the rest of the family to cover it up? We're talking about a dog, depending on what your theory is.
I don't know. I don't know what the theory is. I don't think that even the people that say that this was a dog bite, that Chloe actually was the one who murdered John O'Keefe. I don't think that that's even the people that are saying this theory that it was really Chloe, the dog, which inflicted these wounds on John O'Keefe. But there are other theories about how Chloe was involved, but not necessarily that she was the culprit. But let's continue.
Is that like John got in a fight and the dog, to defend her owner, jumps up and bites this man. Guess what? If the dog had done that, it would have been a serious bite. And you would have seen all these things. And now I'm going to tell my story. So you got to wait on me for a second, Alice. Sorry.
Okay, so he's just going to say a story now about how he got bit by a dog and it was very serious. Okay, and there was a lot of swelling and all those things you don't find with John O'Keefe. So, again, what you're trying to do here is you're trying to fit a specific theory with the evidence that you're seeing, right? So we're seeing this evidence. Dr. Marie Russell is saying that these are dog bites. This is an animal attack. That's what caused these wounds on the arm. So now you're going to try to figure out a theory that fits in with that. And now you're saying this idea of a theory where it's a dog who's defending its owner. And he's going to say that that's ridiculous. If that's what happened, that Chloe was defending its owner, and that's why she bit John O'Keefe, you would never see such superficial wounds. You would see very, very serious wounds. Okay, so let's say that debunks that theory. What does that tell you then? Does that tell you that these are not dog bites? Or does that tell you that you got to come up with a different theory? The facts are the facts. The evidence is the evidence. So unless there's some way for you to discount Dr. Marie Russell's expertise, it's going to be difficult for you to say, yeah, so I guess we can just discount it because it doesn't fit with this specific theory that I just threw out to you. Okay, so maybe there's 500 other theories that it can fit in with. Just you're going to have to work on your theories then. And in fact, the defense's job is not to come up with a theory. The defense's job is just to say, look, these are dog bite wounds. Beyond that, I can't tell you what happened. I wasn't there. I can't tell you exactly how John O'Keefe was killed and what part Chloe played, what part maybe some other dog played. I don't know. What I could tell you is that based on Dr. Marie Russell's testimony, who's been an expert in this, who has seen thousands of cases of wounds, this is from a dog. So let your mind play jumping jacks and cartwheels to figure out some theory to fit that into. I don't mind what theory you come up with. The point is it's got to somehow include this evidence that it's a dog bite. So that's essentially what her testimony was. And again, if you would have another expert who the Commonwealth would put up and say, no, these are not dog bites. These are much more consistent with a vehicle strike. And then you can say, okay, if you want to attack this theory, you can say, okay, well, then I just trust and believe that other expert. Okay, that's what sometimes juries do. They say, we don't believe Dr. Marie Russell because we have a directly contradictory theory by a different expert, and we're going to choose to believe that other expert. Fine. But just because you state a theory and you say it doesn't fit with that theory, and therefore we have to completely discount Dr. Marie Russell's testimony, that's not exactly so 100% logical, I think. So let's continue with his
If you have anything
story.
to say, you might want to say it now.
No, I can't wait for this story. Go for it. We did tell them one episode, so it might be a 5-hour episode, but we're gonna do
Yeah,
it.
maybe. So I have been bitten by dogs twice, once by a German Shepherd, once by a hunting dog. I have witnessed a dog bite someone on the arm right in front of me. And here's what I can tell you. I'm going to tell you the story of my second most recent dog bite, because it was what I would think is a relatively minor bite. So basically, we had just moved into our house. There was mail for the old owner who had rented a place right behind our house. So I walked the mail over. Well, his dog was out front. So, and his dog was barking at me and all this other stuff. And I had the mail. And so I wanted to get the mail like up to the front porch. So basically, I kind of throw the mail up to the front porch. Now the dog is behind an electric fence. So it's like literally I'm standing there. There's the fence. There's the dog right, 6 inches away from me, barking like crazy. I throw the mail. Well, when I throw the mail, it's like the dog thought, I have to just take one from my owner. So the dog actually leaps across the electric fence and bites me on the leg, right? But immediately gets shocked by the electric fence. So as soon as he bit me, he released and fell backwards like in pain, right? So this was like the fastest bite you could imagine. And in fact, it happened so fast that I was hopeful that the damage was relatively low because, it hurt, but it didn't hurt that bad. So the dog, there were puncture holes in my jeans where the dog's teeth had gone through my jeans. And those puncture holes went into my leg and created like these deep wounds. Immediately started swelling, immediately started bruising. And guess what? They were on both sides of my leg. Because here's the thing about a dog. It doesn't just have top teeth or bottom teeth. It has teeth on both sides. And so when it bites you, you are wounded on both sides. And what is the thing about the wounds on John's arms? Only on one side, number one. Number two, no puncture wounds. Number three, no bruising, no broken bones, nothing that would indicate this was actually a dog bite. And I've told the story before, but I'm going to tell it again because,
again, just to say nothing that would indicate that this is a dog bite, you're right. There was no bruises. There was no broken bones. That you're right about. There's no swelling, but the patterns, which Dr. Marie Russell explained to everybody very clearly, is that these are dog bites. So again, all this does is say, well, why wasn't there swelling? That's a good question. You got to answer that question. Why wasn't there bruising? It's a good question. It's a fair question. Maybe there's an answer because this wasn't a serious dog bite. He just talked about a story where he got a serious dog bite, but then the dog immediately got shocked. So, the dog let go and he had a serious wound there. Here, the testimony was never that this was a serious dog bite. The testimony was that these were very superficial wounds. So what caused a dog to only give John O'Keefe superficial wounds? I don't know. That's a fair question. And you got to maybe figure out a theory why it makes sense that a dog would give him these superficial wounds as opposed to deep punctures and bruising and swelling and broken bones. But Dr. Russell would still, again, very strongly opine that these are dog bites.
It's like my most, awesome moment. Didn't have any like alcohol or back to the house.
Disinfected
it so I just tried to do the best I could.
So I can verify this story. This is not an exaggeration because I was texting Brett at the time.
Okay, so you pour Jack Daniels on the wound instead of going to the doctor because you have to go out of town, in case you wanted to hear the rest of the story.
And he was like, just got bit. And I was like, should you go to the hospital? It's like, pour some Jack Daniels on it. And I was like, I think you're doing that just for the story.
It was a great story, though. But
that's
I wish
and I saw that bite. It was bad.
Yeah,
like it
was
looked bad. And I saw you after you got back from your trip, and it was bad. Like it was red and gross, and like I think I told you to go to the hospital because I was like, is it infected?
And it's fully recovered. I've fully recovered, by the way. But here's the thing about this. One of the things you'll hear from experts and from the defense attorneys and all this other stuff is that John should have had bruising. From whatever happened to him, he should have had bruising, and he doesn't have bruising. Yeah, he should have. And you should have bruising if he was bitten by a dog too. And if there is one expert that I do not understand, or one question I do not understand why the Commonwealth never asked, is what is being in the cold? What effect does that have on bruising? Because
okay, so that's a decent point. So let's talk about it. Who was ever arguing that this couldn't have been a pedestrian strike, right? I mean, this is what you hear from the people on Karen Reed's side. If this was a pedestrian strike, well, then there should have been bruising. He should have been broken bones, right? There should have been swelling somewhere, and there wasn't. There was no bruising from his neck down. How does that fit in with a pedestrian strike? Well, then he's arguing, well, then you can flip that around on all of you people who say that you don't think Karen Reed should have been found guilty, because why is there no bruising as it relates to these dog bites, these alleged dog bites? You're saying that these are dog bites by a German Shepherd who's defending its owner? Well, then where's the bruising? Where's the broken bones in those? So you're going to have to answer that same question. So you got a problem anyway you go. But here's the difference, okay? This is just, I think, very simple difference. Everyone has agreed that these are superficial wounds. Everyone has agreed about that. No one has said that these were deep puncture, attack, dog attack, bite and hold wounds. No one has said that. No one has testified about that. Now you have a question. Well, then what happened? In what scenario did some dog only very superficially bite John O'Keefe? Good question. That's not a question that I have to answer. All I can tell you is that the evidence is, from Dr. Marie Russell for sure, is that, and everyone who's seen this, is that these are superficial wounds. These aren't deep puncture wounds. These aren't wounds where the dog was seriously attacking somebody and trying to rip that arm off. So, yeah, the reason why there's no bruising, and also, yeah, maybe he was out in the cold. Maybe that's a good point. Maybe because after he was bitten by the dog, maybe he was already outside. If he wasn't outside, maybe he got taken outside right away, and then he's sitting there, and it's having the same effect as when you put ice. Therefore, it's taking away all the swelling, taking away some of the bruising. The bite wasn't deep enough to cause broken bones, so that's why you don't find broken bones. Okay, so I think some logical conclusions about why there's no bruising about this wounds, because according to everybody, these are just superficial wounds. But let's think about it the other way. Let's think about it that Karen Reed was driving 24 miles per hour in her 5,000 or 8,000 pound Lexus and backing it into someone who is, let's even just call it a side swipe where his arm was sticking out, and there's no bruises at all on his arm. Is there any sort of difference? Let me just ask, is there any sort of difference between being hit by an 8,000 pound truck or Lexus, to be fair, going 24 miles per hour, where that's what you're saying the evidence shows, right? We're not saying the evidence shows that a dog attacked him brutally and bite and hold and punctured his arm through and through. No one has ever said that. You're arguing on the Commonwealth side that she backed her car into him at 24 miles per hour and got to at least smash his arm with that type of force. And you're going to say, well, there's no bruising on his arm. Well, the same way there's no bruising when the dog was gnawing at his arms or whatever happened with the dog. I mean, it's completely different, I think. There's a difference between being hit by a car going 24 miles per hour, which was serious enough to cause you to die, essentially, and then be thrown 30 feet, right? But there's no bruising. And you're comparing that to, there's no bruising by those little dog bites also. So I don't think it's a real fair comparison.
If you had been bitten by a dog in a warm, climate-controlled house, you probably would have bruising because your blood's pumping and everything else. That's the environment where you'd have bruising. But if whatever happened to you while you were outside and you immediately ended up in the cold and then you're covered up with snow, guess what happens? All your blood rushes from your extremities to your core to try and prevent you from dying. So it's not that surprising that we don't see any bruising on John's body. But if he had been bitten
Now, that I think, like I said, that's a decent point. I think that's a decent point for perhaps to explain why there's no swelling by the dog bite. Maybe he was outside in the cold, but it doesn't really explain broken bones. If you're hit by a car going 24 miles per hour and you just keep your arm out there, there's probably going to something be broken there, or some chip or something there, as part of the bruising. So it's not exactly apples to apples again, but this is the point that he's making here.
Bitten by a dog in that house, he should have had bruising. How is it possible that you could be bitten by a dog and not have any bruising? And yet, this is where we are with this expert. Now, Lally does a good job about noting that there are only wounds on one side as opposed to both sides. He notes the lack of dog DNA. Russell, thinking she's clever, says, well, it would have been on his clothes. Unfortunately for her, it was the clothes that had been swabbed for DNA, not John's wounds or skin. And as we said before, it was negative for DNA. So look, if you want to believe that John was attacked by a dog, just know that it is the weirdest attack by a dog, particularly one protecting its owner, that I've ever heard of and that this doctor has ever seen. And it would have been an attack that was so minor that it would not have required him to go to the hospital. Those are her words, not mine.
Yeah. I'm not going to add to your dog story because there's no dog story.
Okay, so just coming back to that. So the DNA issue, right? This is what the argument has been for all the people who think Karen Reed's guilty, is that, if this was a dog attack, so number one, where's all the bruising? And we kind of explained that already, that, yeah, this is a little bit of a weird attack. I mean, there's just no way about it. I don't think you can say that it completely discounts it. Dr. Mead Russell has been seeing thousands of cases and said that this is consistent with the dog, with those wounds being from a dog. Now, whether you're going to call it a dog attack, dog gnawing, some other way that a dog inflicted that, fine. I mean, you can go crazy with the theories. Yeah, it is a little bit strange. It's a little bit weird. That doesn't completely negate it. Now, the other part here is they're going to say, okay, what about the DNA? What about the DNA? There's no DNA that was swabbed. And by the way, in case you're wondering, did they really swab every single area? Well, she said that she swabbed all 9 puncture wounds in his jacket. So she definitely did do a lot of swabbing in those areas. Now, it could be, were all those puncture wounds on his jacket not from the dog, and the only 2 wounds that maybe the 2 punctures, holes that maybe she didn't get to, that she didn't swab. Okay, you can make some arguments like that. Not as persuasive, I think, as the following argument. So let's assume that the DNA person who was trying to swab all the puncture holes swabbed basically did a good job at swabbing all 9 areas where she marked there was some holes in his jacket. Well, let's move on to the next thing. So now, remember, this is, I think, more of a reasonable argument, is that there's no DNA. That's true. No DNA. But what happened? The DNA, right, was this jacket was sitting in the snow for hours, right? Hours and hours and hours it's sitting in the snow. So what effect does that have on the keeping this DNA reliable? To keep the DNA there. And then after he's sitting in the snow, John O'Keefe's lying in the snow for hours and hours and hours, then he gets transported to the hospital. So in a hospital, he's in an ambulance, and you've got his clothing wrapped up there. So now his clothing is all wrapped up with other clothing, and the snow's starting to melt. So everything's starting to get sopping wet. And now it's sitting in some sort of ambulance. Then it's now you're out of the ambulance, and now you're in the hospital. And now you're in the hospital for a number of hours, again, with all this other clothing sopping wet. And then you have it sitting in an evidence bag, allegedly, for months, because it wasn't submitted to the DNA lab until UC Davis, until March 14th. So from January 22nd through March 14th, it's just sitting, allegedly, in an evidence bag or an evidence locker, just sitting there doing nothing. Okay, so now there is a decent question to be made about why was it just sitting there? Was it just sitting there? What was going on with those articles of clothing for months and months while it's just sitting there in an evidence locker, not being submitted to the lab for some odd reason? Okay, that's number one. And number two, even if it's just sitting there, again, it's sitting there with other clothing after it's all of its trips, after being completely sopping wet. And now we're going to say, yeah, that's definitely a reliable DNA test. So even if we are to assume that the swab was done properly and correctly, and they swabbed every area of that shirt, which would make sense that the dog would bite through. And after, even if we assume all that, still it's traveling, and it's possibility for contamination is a little bit more high than a regular case. So then it doesn't completely debunk the whole idea that these are dog bites. And when you have an expert who's seen thousands of cases and telling you that these are dog bites, these are dog inflicted, then you're going to have to try to figure out how everything else fits in, instead of just saying, well, she must not know what she's talking about because she, I don't know, just is biased. And we can't trust her as an expert, and she's getting up on the stand and completely lying through her teeth, and she doesn't have any expertise in this area. So, that's where it gets a little bit more, I think, reasonable. So I think that's essentially their arguments here. There's a little bit more to this, and she says a story also about her dog bite incident, and how it was much more of a serious dog bite that was on both sides, and therefore if this was a dog attack, then you would expect to see more wounds. I understand that. I understand that if this was a dog attack, there should be more wounds and more bruising and more swelling. You're right. That's a decent point. The bottom line is that these are dog wounds. These abrasions, these patterns are dog wounds. How did that happen? Great question. I don't know how that happened. You have to come up with a theory how that happened. It's not my job. My job is just to analyze the evidence. So I don't think there's been enough questions to say, well, then therefore Dr. Marie Russell must completely have made up all this stuff and doesn't know what in the world she's talking about after doing this for 30 years. So that's just my opinion about it. And again, at the very least, does it give you reasonable doubt? Does it give you reasonable doubt that actually this was a dog as opposed to something else? I think you at least get to reasonable doubt. So that is, again, the second witness that the Prosecutors podcast talked about. And then maybe we'll move on to the next witnesses until eventually we get to the ARCA witnesses, which I think are the most interesting ones to talk about. So that's going to be it for now. Again, happy holidays to all of you out there. Thanks for taking the time to spend some time with me on this holiday season. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe, like, and we will see you next time.